My brother sat at the complainant's table in a pressed charcoal suit and told the panel I had been practicing, without a valid CPA designation for 3 years. He was composed, measured. He had rehearsed every syllable. My mother sat in the gallery behind him, her hands folded over a beige Coach purse, dabbing her eyes before anything worth crying about had even happened. My father sat beside her with the rigid posture of a man who has spent 4 decades making other people feel small and considers it a professional accomplishment. I sat at the respondent's table. I did not move. I did not react. I let my hands rest flat on the surface in front of me and I breathed, slowly, while the chair of the Professional Conduct Committee opened the evidence binder my brother had submitted and read the first page in complete silence. I watched the chair's expression change. It happened quickly, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw. She set the binder down, excused herself to the other panel members in a voice that came out softer than she intended, and left the room. My brother smiled to himself and adjusted his cufflinks. He had no idea the evidence he submitted had already been verified 3 days earlier by a retired documents examiner in Mississauga. He had absolutely no idea that the chair had just read the name of a CPA Ontario registrar who had retired in 2019 on a document my brother was claiming was dated 2022. The trap had already closed. He just hadn't felt it yet. The formal complaint from CPA Ontario arrived on a Thursday afternoon, couriered to my office on King Street West in downtown Toronto. It came in a thick gray envelope with the provincial seal on the front, and my assistant brought it to me without knowing what it was. I opened it standing at my desk and read the first page 3 times before I put it down. My brother had filed a complaint with the Professional Standards Committee claiming I had misrepresented my CPA designation on client engagement letters, that my certification had lapsed, and that I had continued to practice public accounting and sign off on financial statements under false pretenses. The filing was thorough. It was professionally formatted. It cited specific sections of the CPA Ontario bylaws. My brother had spent real time on it or paid someone to. Beneath his signature were 2 supporting statements. My father, a retired real estate developer. My mother, a former school board trustee. Both had submitted sworn declarations confirming they had reason to believe my credentials were fabricated. I stood at my desk on the 14th floor with Lake Ontario visible through the window on a clear October afternoon, and I felt the temperature in my blood drop somewhere far below reasonable. I did not call them, not immediately. I drove that evening to their house in Forest Hill, parked on the street behind my father's Lexus, and walked up to the front door. My mother answered. She was in her dinner clothes, a silk blouse, pressed trousers, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at me with an expression I had seen my entire life, mild inconvenience. I set the complaint on the entryway table. My father came from the kitchen holding a glass of Merlot. He looked at the papers, then at me, and said nothing. My mother spoke first. She said she and my father were worried about me, that the stress of running my own firm had been affecting my judgment for years, that they had spoken to my brother and he had raised concerns they could no longer ignore in good conscience. She delivered all of this in the calm, modulated tone of someone reading from a prepared statement. My father set his wineglass down. He told me I had always been impractical, that opening a small independent accounting practice on Bay Street, competing against the Big Four, against mid-size regional firms, against people with better connections and more capital, had been a vanity project dressed up as ambition. He said my brother's construction firm had a reputation to maintain, that if clients started associating the family name with a regulatory complaint, it would reflect poorly on everyone. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I said nothing. I picked up the complaint from the entryway table and walked back out to my car. I sat on the QEW in stopped traffic for 40 minutes on the drive home. By the time I reached my condo in Liberty Village, I had already started thinking clearly enough to understand that my brother did not do this out of spite alone. He was not sentimental enough for pure malice. There was a financial thread underneath this, and I needed to find it. I called in a favor from a contact I had worked with years earlier during a forensic accounting case, a private investigator named Mr. Hartwell who operated out of a bland office in Etobicoke and had a talent for finding things that people believed were well hidden. We met the following morning at a Portuguese cafe on Dundas West. He ordered a coffee and did not make small talk. He told me my brother's construction company had been flagged by the CARA for an internal audit. The notice had gone out 6 weeks earlier. The scope of the audit covered 3 fiscal years. Based on what Mr. Hartwell had pieced together from public filings and a source inside the industry, my brother had been moving money through his corporate accounts in a way that was, at best, aggressive, and at worst, straightforward fraud. An estimated $400,000 in subcontractor payments could not be accounted for by legitimate invoices. The motive clicked into place with terrible clarity. If my CPA designation was revoked by the committee, my firm would be placed under a practice inspection order. Under the CPA Ontario bylaws, a court could appoint a receiver to manage the transition of my client files and trust accounts. My brother intended to petition the court to be appointed as that receiver. Several of my clients were in the middle of significant transactions, real estate closings, corporate mergers, estate settlements. Their funds were sitting in my trust account. My brother wanted access to that money, not permanently, just long enough to paper over his own deficit before the CRA auditors arrived. He was planning to use the legal corpse of my career to save his own. Mr. Hartwell slid a manila envelope across the table. Building access logs from my brother's company office, sourced through a contact with the property management company. Email metadata from a document submitted as evidence, showing it had been created from a device registered to my brother's company's IT account. He had also obtained a handwritten sign-in sheet from the building's overnight security desk, which bore my brother's signature at the exact time in question, 11:15 on the night the complaint was filed. Mr. Hartwell told me to keep him out of it from that point forward. He was attending a family event in Prince Edward Island and would be unreachable. He did not smile when he said this. He stood up, pocketed his fee, and walked out through the cafe's glass door into the gray October morning. I sat alone at the table for a few minutes, holding the envelope. A memory hit me before I was ready for it. I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table in the Scarborough house we lived in, before my parents' money found them a better postal code. I had applied to the accounting program at Queen's University without telling anyone. I paid the application fee from money saved working weekends at a grocery store. When the acceptance letter arrived, I brought it straight to my father. He read it without picking it up off the table. He told me accounting was a middle-class aspiration, that the people who actually built things, who developed land, who created companies, who shaped skylines, did not spend their careers doing other people's bookkeeping. He said he would not fund a degree that led to a career he considered beneath the family's standing. I paid for Queen's myself, OSAP loans, a partial bursary, 3 part-time jobs, a credit line I finished paying off at 29. My father did not come to my convocation. My mother sent a card with a $50 gift certificate to a bookstore that had closed the previous year. I had built my practice from the ground up over 8 years. The clients I served were small business owners, independent contractors, families managing estates, people who needed someone who would actually pay attention to their files. None of them were glamorous. All of them trusted me. My brother wanted to use that trust to float his own fraud. I let the memory burn for one moment, and then I folded it away. I did not have the luxury of sitting in it. Angry people make noise, and noise gives the other side something to answer. I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you can do when someone is constructing a case against you is to let them finish building it, and then show them what was already built underneath. The disciplinary hearing was held in a CPA Ontario boardroom on Adelaide Street, 3 weeks later. The committee consisted of 3 senior members and a legal counsel. My brother arrived with a lawyer from a mid-sized Bay Street firm. My parents sat in the gallery. I arrived with my own legal representative, a woman who had spent 15 years in professional regulatory law and did not waste words. My brother presented his complaint with the performance of someone who had rehearsed every expression. He spoke about professional integrity and family duty. He submitted his evidence binder. The fabricated designation lapse notice, the altered engagement letter, a sworn statement from a former colleague who claimed I had verbally admitted my certification was under review. My mother was called to give a supporting statement. She described years of quiet concern, careful language, nothing that could be directly verified or directly disproved. She did not produce tears, but she worked hard at the suggestion of them. My father testified about the family's commitment to ethical professional conduct. He used the word disappointed 4 times. He looked past me while he spoke. I sat. I did not lean over to whisper to my counsel. I watched my family construct a version of me in that room, careless, dishonest, cutting corners, and I let them finish. Every word they put on the record was theirs to own. Then the chair returned from her brief recess. She stated, in precise language, that the designation lapse notice submitted as primary evidence bore the signature of a CPA Ontario registrar, who had retired 18 months before the date printed on the document. She stated that the committee had independently verified this with the provincial registry that morning, before the hearing began. She stated this without inflection, in the manner of someone describing a structural defect in a building they had been asked to certify. She asked my brother's counsel to explain the discrepancy. My brother's counsel conferred with his client in a low, urgent voice. My brother kept his face arranged in an expression of confusion, but I could see his left hand making small, tight adjustments to his jacket lapel, a gesture I had watched my entire childhood when he was lying and beginning to understand he was cornered. My legal counsel stood. She placed the documents Mr. Hartwell had compiled on the table in front of the committee. The building access log, the email metadata report, the handwritten security sign-in sheet with my brother's signature, timestamped at 11:15 p.m., on the night the altered documents were created on his company's system. She offered the committee one direct question. Before issuing a formal subpoena for my brother's company's IT server logs, which would confirm, definitively, which user account had generated the disputed documents, did my brother wish to revise any part of his submission? The composure my brother had spent 3 weeks building came apart in under a minute. He pushed back from the table. He started talking, too fast, too loud, about pressure from our parents, about advice from a colleague who had misled him, about his IT department having access to his login credentials. He blamed 4 separate people in under 2 minutes, none of whom were himself. His voice climbed in a way that filled the room with something awful to witness. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because I recognized the sound. It was the sound of someone realizing, for the first time, that they had overestimated their own safety. The chair gavelled the room to quiet. She instructed the committee's legal counsel to note for the record that the respondents' counsel had presented material evidence of document fabrication, and that the matter would be referred to the Law Society and the Ontario Provincial Police for review of potential fraud and obstruction charges. She then addressed my parents directly. She informed them, without any particular emphasis, that their sworn declarations had been submitted in support of evidence that appeared to be fabricated, and that their statements would be reviewed as part of the broader referral. She asked that their contact information be confirmed for the record, and that they remain available to investigators. My father stood before anyone addressed him further, and began speaking about his 40 years of professional reputation, his contributions to the community, his relationships with city officials. He named a city councillor. He mentioned a hospital wing. The chair looked at him for a moment without expression, and said that his professional standing was not at issue in these proceedings, but that his legal exposure potentially was, and that he might wish to retain counsel before the referral was complete. 2 OPPP officers who had been waiting in the corridor, contacted in advance by my counsel based on the evidence we had prepared, came through the door and escorted my brother from the room. My mother sat frozen in her seat, her purse still perfectly positioned on her lap, looking at the middle distance. I placed a cease and desist letter on my parents' table as I passed. I did not speak. I walked through the glass lobby doors onto Adelaide Street into a sharp October afternoon. 2 days later, my brother was released on conditions. He was prohibited from accessing any professional databases or client information, and from contacting me or my firm's clients directly or indirectly. My father had posted bail using a line of credit secured against his investment property in Oakville. My brother believed, apparently, that bail conditions were open to interpretation. I had counted on this. He was not someone who could tolerate losing control of a situation, especially one that was unraveling publicly. So the night before his release, I did one quiet thing. I sent a message to my mother's phone number, a number my brother had full access to, since he had been managing her digital accounts for the past year. The message appeared to contain a confidential mediation document related to a settlement involving my firm. It was not a document. It was a forensic logging link that recorded the device identity, IP address, and physical location of anyone who opened it. My brother opened it from my mother's iPad at 2:14 in the morning. The log report was in my counsel's inbox by 2:15. She filed the bail violation notice with the OPP before 9 a.m. By noon, officers were at my parents' house in Forest Hill. My brother had accessed a link intended to gather information about a live legal matter involving me, from a prohibited device, in the middle of the night, a clear violation of his release conditions, and a new count of criminal harassment with a digital component. His bail was revoked. There was no second posting. What I had not anticipated was what happened in the entryway. My father was standing in the front hall of his Forest Hill house when the officers arrived, watching them work through my mother's iPad. He looked at my brother, and then, in the same cold, authoritative tone he had used at dinner tables my entire life, he told my brother he was on his own. Not quietly. Not with any visible conflict. He said he had put his Oakville property on the line, and he was not going to lose a 40-year investment because of my brother's inability to stop making things worse. He said his lawyers had advised him that morning to make clear he had no prior knowledge of the bail violation, so he was making that clear. My brother looked at our father with an expression I had never seen on him before. It wasn't anger, it was recognition, the kind that comes too late to be useful. My father did not look back. The officers left with the iPad as evidence. The door closed. The family that had filed a joint complaint to end my career was now formally in 3 separate legal positions, each one adversarial to the others. I got the call from my counsel while I was at my desk, reviewing a year-end file for a client in Waterloo. She told me the bail had been revoked, that my brother was in custody, and that my father's counsel had contacted her office to express his client's full cooperation with the investigation going forward. I thanked her. I hung up. I went back to the file. I deleted my brother's number that evening. I deleted my parents' numbers the following morning, after a consideration that took less time than I expected. People sometimes ask me how I managed to sit in that hearing room without saying a word while my family lied. How I could watch all of it, and not feel the need to defend myself, to interrupt, to make them see what they were doing. The honest answer is that I had already processed most of the grief long before that room existed. When you grow up in a family where your choices are treated as personal insults, and your accomplishments are treated as inconveniences, you spend years waiting to be accurately seen. At some point, you stop waiting, not out of bitterness, out of practicality. You understand that their version of you was never really about you. It was about what your independence cost them, specifically, the illusion that their judgment was the only reasonable judgment. My brother didn't come after my career because he hated me. He came after it because he needed it, and because he had never once considered that I might have built something solid enough to survive him. To him, my firm was just an asset he could temporarily liquidate. He had never seen me as someone who built things that lasted. I had always been the one in the family who tried too hard at the wrong things. What he missed was that building without a safety net teaches you things that a family safety net cannot. When you build something without connections, without capital, without anyone making calls on your behalf, you learn how to document everything. You learn how to read a set of numbers, like you are looking for a lie, because sometimes you genuinely are. You learn how to sit still in a bad room and wait for the moment when the other side runs out of prepared material. You learn that the people who call you impractical are often the most afraid of what your success proves about their limitations. I thought about all of this in the weeks after, not with resentment, but with something closer to curiosity, because the strangest part of the entire experience was how quiet everything became. Not lonely quiet, clear quiet, the low-grade noise that I had learned to accept as normal. The obligation to manage my parents' expectations, to soften my achievements so they didn't read as indictments of their choices, to absorb my brother's contempt as if it were a form of sibling closeness, simply stopped. My practice continued. I took on 2 new clients in November, both referrals from people who had heard through the industry that the complaint had been dismissed and referred for prosecution. My team expanded by 1 junior associate in January. The work was the same work it had always been. Careful, unglamorous, exact. I had always liked it. There are 3 things I came to understand from all of this that I want to say directly, because I think they are more widely applicable than just my situation. The first is that family obligation is not the same as family love. We are taught, persistently, that shared blood creates a debt, that the people who raised you are owed a version of yourself that they approve of, regardless of what it costs you. This is not love. Love does not require you to reduce yourself to remain acceptable. What my parents were protecting was not a relationship with me. It was a hierarchy. When I stopped serving the hierarchy, I became a problem. The complaint was not an act of concern. It was a correction. And you are allowed to refuse to be corrected into a smaller version of yourself by people who benefit from your smallness. The second is what I think of as the golden child problem. My brother believed he was the family's designated success, well-dressed, well-connected, admired at the right events. But he was not loved the way he believed he was. He was managed. He was the family's proof that their choices had been right. Their public-facing evidence that the values they held were the values that worked. The moment he became a liability, the moment maintaining him required my father to risk something he actually valued, he was cut loose without hesitation. The people who had called him driven, capable, the one who understood how the world actually worked, those same people watched him be walked out of a room in handcuffs and immediately began calculating their own legal exposure. That is not a family. That is a board of directors cutting a losing position. The golden child lives in permanent anxiety about losing the pedestal. The one who was never given a pedestal has already learned to stand on the ground. The third is the one that changed how I move through every room now. You do not win against people who weaponize relationships by meeting them with louder emotion. Emotional reaction is what they are built for. They have been practicing it your entire shared history, and they are better at it than you. What you do is document everything, quietly. You secure your position. You gather what is true and verifiable and put it somewhere safe. And then you step out of the way and let them walk themselves to the edge of their own construction. The most powerful move I made in that entire process was sitting still. The most powerful move I made afterward was walking away. I went back to my office the afternoon of the hearing and finished a file I had set aside the morning the complaint arrived. The client was a woman, in her early 60s, who had spent 30 years running a small landscaping company in Scarborough and was finally in a position to retire with enough to feel secure. She had called me a few weeks earlier, not about anything specific, just to say thank you for paying attention to her file over the years, for actually knowing what was in it. That is the work. That is the whole of it. I turned off my desk lamp at 6:30, took the elevator down to King Street, and walked home through the cold.